The afternoon sun cast a warm golden hue over the quiet suburban neighborhood as Emily Parker sat in her small bedroom, surrounded by scattered sheets of paper covered in bright, vivid colors. At just 12 years old, Emily was an incredibly talented young artist. Her small hands worked diligently, carefully blending shades of blue and pink on the canvas in front of her. Art had always been her escape, her passion, the thing that made her feel alive. But lately, life had changed in ways she never expected. A few months ago, Emily had been diagnosed with leukemia. The news had shattered her world. One day, she had been a normal girl, painting in her backyard, playing with her best friend Lily, and dreaming of becoming a famous artist. The next, she was lying in a hospital bed, tubes in her arms, doctors speaking in serious tones to her parents. She had never seen her mother cry so much before. Her father, usually strong and composed, had gripped her mother's hand so tightly his knuckles turned white. The treatments had started almost immediately, rounds of chemotherapy that left her feeling weak and exhausted. She had lost her thick chestnut hair within weeks, and though she tried to be brave, there were nights when she would curl up in bed, crying softly into her pillow, wishing it was all just a bad dream. But Emily wasn't just scared. She was determined. Even as the medical bills piled up, even as she overheard hushed conversations between her parents about their dwindling savings, she refused to let cancer take away the one thing she loved most: painting. One evening, while lying in bed, an idea formed in her mind. If her parents were struggling to afford her treatment, maybe, just maybe, she could help. Maybe her paintings, the ones she poured her heart into, could be sold. Not for much, but enough to make a difference. The very next morning, Emily gathered all her best artwork: landscapes of sunrises, portraits of animals, abstract splashes of colors that represented her emotions, and carefully packed them into a large folder. She took a small wooden easel from her bedroom, along with a handmade sign that read, "Art for sale. Help me beat cancer." It wasn't a plea for pity. It was a message of hope. She found the perfect spot to set up her little makeshift stall. Right outside the local park, where people passed by on their morning walks, where parents took their kids to play, and where she had spent so many happy afternoons before her illness took over. She spread a blanket on the grass under the shade of an old oak tree, carefully propping up her paintings and arranging them in a way that showed off their beauty. The colors shone brightly under the sunlight, as if they, too, were fighting for a chance to be seen. Her first morning sitting there was filled with nervous excitement. She watched as people walked past. Some glanced at her work and smiled politely. Others didn't notice at all. A few people stopped to admire the paintings, nodding in appreciation, but after a moment, they moved on without buying anything. Emily tried not to let it discourage her. She wasn't expecting to sell everything right away. She knew she had to be patient. After about an hour, an elderly woman with silver hair and kind eyes approached. She studied Emily's paintings for a long moment before pointing at one, a delicate watercolor of a bluebird perched on a tree branch. "This is beautiful," the woman said warmly. "Did you paint this?" Emily nodded eagerly. "Yes, ma'am. I painted all of them." The woman smiled and pulled out her wallet. "I'd love to buy it." Emily's heart leaped. Her very first sale. She carefully wrapped the painting and handed it over, feeling a spark of hope ignite inside her. For the rest of the morning, she sold 2 more paintings. Small ones, but each sale felt like a step closer to helping her parents, to helping herself. But as the sun began to set, the reality of the situation set in. She had made a little money, but it wasn't nearly enough. The treatments she needed cost thousands of dollars, and she had only earned a fraction of that. Still, she refused to give up. As she packed up her things for the day, she whispered to herself, "Tomorrow will be better." Little did she know, fate had something extraordinary in store for her. The morning sun climbed higher in the sky, casting long shadows across the park where Emily had set up her little art stall. Despite the crispness of the autumn air, a bead of sweat formed at her temple, more from nervousness than the warmth of the sun. She had arrived early, arranging her paintings with extra care, hoping that today would be different. Today she would sell more. But as the hours passed, reality set in. People walked by without noticing her. Some glanced at her artwork briefly before continuing on their way. Others stopped for a moment, admiring the colors, then shook their heads and moved on. A few smiled at her, but their kindness never extended to opening their wallets. Emily tried not to let it bother her, but it was hard. She watched as a well-dressed businessman, wearing an expensive suit and polished shoes, strolled past with a cup of gourmet coffee in hand. He glanced at her sign, "Art for sale, help me beat cancer," raised an eyebrow, then looked away as if he hadn't seen it at all. His car, a sleek black Mercedes, was parked nearby, probably cost more than what she needed for her treatments. Still, he walked past as if she were invisible. A group of teenage boys came next, laughing loudly amongst themselves. One of them nudged another and gestured toward Emily's display. "Dude, look at this," he snickered. "Selling paintings to pay for chemo? That's so depressing." Another boy smirked. "Bet she makes more money off sympathy than talent." Emily's face burned with humiliation, but she forced herself to stay calm. She clenched her fists in her lap, resisting the urge to say something. What would be the point? They wouldn't understand. They didn't know what it was like to be sick, to feel trapped in a body that was betraying you, to watch your parents break down at night when they thought you were asleep. She looked away, pretending she hadn't heard them, and instead focused on the few people who did show interest in her work. An older couple paused in front of her display. The woman, wearing a warm beige sweater, picked up a small painting of a sunset over the ocean. Her husband peered at it over her shoulder. "This is lovely," the woman murmured. Emily's heart lifted. Maybe they would buy something. But then the man frowned. "It's nice, but we don't need more clutter at home." The woman hesitated, then sighed and put the painting back. "You're right." And just like that, they were gone. Emily swallowed hard. She had known this wouldn't be easy. She had known that people weren't obligated to buy her art. But it still hurt to watch them walk away, knowing that every dollar she didn't make was another setback, another hurdle in her fight for survival. She had been at the park for nearly 3 hours and had only sold one painting. A tiny sketch of a hummingbird, bought by an elderly woman who had given her an encouraging pat on the hand. Her spirits were sinking. Was this pointless? Would she ever raise enough? Just as doubt threatened to overwhelm her, a soft voice interrupted her thoughts. "I'd like to buy this one." Emily looked up to see a woman in her 60s, her silver hair tucked neatly into a bun. She held up a small watercolor painting of a cherry blossom tree, her eyes warm and kind. Emily managed to smile. "Really?" The woman nodded, reaching into her purse. "It's beautiful. You have an incredible gift." Emily wrapped the painting carefully and handed it over. When the woman gave her the money, Emily's breath caught in her throat. There was far more than the price she had written. This is too much," Emily stammered. The woman simply squeezed her hand. "No, dear, it's not nearly enough. You're incredibly brave." For the first time that day, Emily felt a spark of hope. Maybe, just maybe, things would get better. Little did she know, her life was about to change in ways she never imagined. Emily sat on her small wooden stool, her legs curled beneath her as she absent-mindedly traced patterns on the pavement with her fingers. The sun had begun its descent, painting the sky in hues of orange and pink, casting long shadows across the park. Despite the breathtaking view, Emily felt only exhaustion. Today had been another long, disappointing day. She had managed to sell only 3 paintings, better than some days, but nowhere near enough to cover the overwhelming cost of her chemotherapy. She looked at the remaining paintings arranged neatly on the small folding table. Each one held a piece of her heart. Vibrant landscapes, delicate flowers, portraits infused with quiet emotion. Every brushstroke carried the weight of her dreams, her hopes, her desperate need to fight for her own life. Yet, most people walked by without a second glance. Emily sighed, rubbing her tired eyes. Maybe it was time to pack up and try again tomorrow. Just as she reached for her canvas bag, she heard the faint scuff of boots on the pavement. A shadow stretched across her table. "These are some fine paintings you got here," "Kid?" a deep voice drawled. Emily looked up, her tired eyes widening in surprise. Standing before her was an older man in a dark leather jacket, a cowboy hat perched on his head. His weathered face was lined with experience, his sharp eyes filled with curiosity and wisdom. He studied her artwork with the kind of appreciation she hadn't seen all day. She blinked. There was something familiar about him. It wasn't until he lifted his head and gave her a small, thoughtful smile that realization struck her like a bolt of lightning. Clint Eastwood. Her breath caught in her throat. The legendary actor and filmmaker, the man whose name was known across the world, was standing in front of her humble art stall, flipping through her paintings like he had all the time in the world. Her heart pounded. Was she dreaming? Clint picked up a watercolor painting of an old wooden bridge surrounded by cherry blossoms. He held it up against the fading light, studying the delicate brushwork, the gentle blending of colors. "This one's real special," he murmured. Then his eyes met hers. "Did you paint all these yourself?" Emily swallowed hard, forcing herself to find her voice. "Why, yes, sir." He nodded approvingly. "You got talent." Heat rose to Emily's cheeks. It wasn't every day that someone like Clint Eastwood called her talented. He set the painting down carefully and motioned toward the sign at her table. "Art for sale. Help me beat cancer." His expression softened. "You fighting cancer, kid?" Emily hesitated, then nodded. "Leukemia. She paused, not wanting to sound like she was begging for sympathy. "I'm selling my paintings to help pay for my treatments. My parents. They're doing everything they can, but it's expensive." Clint studied her for a long moment, his gaze unreadable. Then, something in his eyes shifted. He let out a low breath and placed a hand on the table, drumming his fingers against the wood. "You know, I've met a lot of artists in my time. Some folks paint for fame, some for fortune. But you're painting to survive. That takes guts." Emily felt her throat tighten. No one had ever put it that way before. Clint straightened, his stance firm, full of quiet purpose. "How much for the whole lot?" Emily blinked. What?" I said. "How much for all of 'em?" He repeated, gesturing toward the entire display of paintings. Emily's breath hitched. She couldn't believe what she was hearing. I don't know," she stammered. "I mean, altogether, maybe a couple $100?" She felt embarrassed even saying it out loud. She knew her work wasn't worth much in the art world. Clint chuckled, shaking his head. "That won't do." Reaching into his pocket, he pulled out a thick leather wallet. Emily barely had time to react before he pulled out a crisp stack of $100 bills and set them gently on the table. Her hands trembled as she stared at the money. It was far more than the total price of her paintings. It was a fortune. I can't take this," she whispered, shaking her head in disbelief. "You can and you will," Clint said firmly. "Call it an investment. I expect to see your name in galleries one day." Tears welled up in Emily's eyes. "Thank you," she choked out. "I don't even know what to say." Clint gave her a small smile. "No need to say anything, kid. Just keep painting." He began gathering the paintings, carefully stacking them in his arms. Before walking away, he turned back to her, tipping his hat in that signature Eastwood style. "Oh, and one more thing," he added with a wink. "You ever need a little publicity, you got my number." And with that, he walked off into the golden sunset, leaving Emily sitting there, stunned, overwhelmed, and for the first time in a long while, hopeful. The moment Clint Eastwood walked away with Emily's paintings, something shifted in the air. It was as if time had frozen for a few seconds, and everyone who had previously walked by her stall without a second glance was now stopping in their tracks. A middle-aged woman, who had been observing the scene from a nearby bench, rushed over. "Was that really Clint Eastwood?" she asked, her voice trembling with excitement. Emily, still in shock, nodded. The woman's gaze flickered to the stack of cash Clint had left behind. Her expression softened. "And he bought all your paintings?" Again, Emily nodded. A young couple who had overheard the conversation approached. "That's incredible," the man murmured. We were just about to leave, but after seeing that, we want to help too. He reached into his wallet and pulled out a few bills, placing them on the table. Here, for your treatment. Tears welled up in Emily's eyes. You don't have to. We want to, the woman interrupted gently. That man saw something special in you, and now so do we. More people started gathering around. Someone had taken a quick video of Clint Eastwood's act of kindness and uploaded it to social media. Within minutes, the post was gaining traction. Likes, shares, and comments flooding in. A man in a business suit stepped forward, placing a generous donation on Emily's table. I lost my wife to cancer last year, he admitted. If I can help someone else fight, I'll do it. One by one, strangers stepped forward, each leaving donations, words of encouragement, and heartfelt smiles. Emily's hands trembled as she looked at the growing pile of money. What had started as just another tough day had transformed into something truly extraordinary. By the time Emily returned home that night, she was exhausted, but for the first time in a long while, it was a good exhaustion. She told her parents everything, showing them the stack of money. Her mother burst into tears, holding her daughter tightly. The next morning, Emily's phone wouldn't stop buzzing. The video of Clint Eastwood's act of kindness had gone viral overnight. News outlets were picking up the story. Celebrities, influencers, and thousands of strangers were sharing Emily's artwork, encouraging people to support her battle against leukemia. Donations flooded in from across the world. Within a week, Emily had received enough money not just for her remaining treatments, but for all of her medical expenses. It was a miracle, one sparked by a single act of kindness. A year later, Emily sat in a hospital room, clutching a piece of paper in her hands. It was her final test results. She took a deep breath as her doctor smiled warmly. Emily, you're cancer-free. Tears streamed down her cheeks as she hugged her parents. She had done it. She had beaten cancer. But Emily knew this was just the beginning. She threw herself into her passion, painting every day, creating works of art that told stories of struggle, hope, and kindness. She wanted her paintings to inspire others the way Clint Eastwood had inspired her. A few years later, Emily stood in the center of a grand art gallery, dressed in an elegant white dress. The walls were lined with her paintings, each one more breathtaking than the last. People from all walks of life, art collectors, celebrities, cancer survivors, and everyday people who had followed her journey, had come to see her work. At the entrance, a large banner read, "Paintings of Hope, a special exhibition by Emily Thompson." But at the center of the gallery, displayed with the utmost care, was a painting unlike any other. It was a stunning portrait of Clint Eastwood, painted with deep, rich colors, his wise eyes full of warmth and kindness. Below it, Emily had inscribed, "To the man who changed my life forever." As the crowd admired her work, a familiar voice broke through the murmurs. "Well, kid, looks like you made it." Emily turned, and there he was, Clint Eastwood, now older, but still carrying the same presence that had left her in awe all those years ago. She felt a lump in her throat. "Mr. Eastwood," he stepped forward, looking at the painting of himself. A slow smile spread across his face. "You didn't just survive, you thrived." Emily nodded, blinking back tears. "Because you believed in me," Clint chuckled. "Nah, you believed in yourself." As the cameras flashed and the crowd applauded, Emily realized something. This wasn't just her story. This was a story about hope, kindness, and the power of one small act to change a life. If the story moved you, remember, kindness can change the world. Never underestimate the impact of a small act of generosity. Like, share, and subscribe to our channel to hear more inspiring stories that remind us of the goodness in humanity.